What is good, everyone? Welcome back to Kingdom Economics. We are, of course, reviewing this month of accumulation. And for those of you on YouTube watching this, we have gone over several areas. Now, while those of you on YouTube have seen the one about collectibles, compound interest, investments, and resources, we did talk about several other things that really have been very helpful and explosive in growth. But as always, as a disclaimer, I am not an attorney or a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financier. I'm not licensed in any of these areas. This is purely educational information. So if you have any specific questions regarding those areas, contact your professionals and they'll take care of that for you. And for those of you that are new, Kingdom Economics is about wealth built on biblical principles and spiritual alignment with one's identity in Yeshua. And it is snowing today as well. Just wanted to throw that out there. Woke up to that awesomeness. But before we get started, let's go ahead and get into some prayer. Father, we come before you in the mighty name of Yeshua Mashiach, as you are great and greatly to be praised. We boldly come before your throne of grace to find mercy and grace to help in time of need. And we ensure during this time that your will is being done through our lives. For your kingdom come, your will be done. As it is in heaven, we will have it done on Haaretz. And we want to ensure that there's no astral traffic trading happening. We will not be hindered or checked or prevented or stopped by any outside forces, by the kingdom of darkness or those against your kingdom. And we ensure that your Ruach flows through what we discuss and what we speak about, that we are not just receiving words of knowledge, but we receive your understanding and wisdom to be fruitful and multiply what it is that you give us to steward. I've established sentinel angels at every dimensional access point, so that way there is that guardianship during this time for every point of what you want to establish. Pray this on your mighty name, Yeshua Mashiach. Hav. All right, everyone. So, review for last video. Of course, briefly mention about collectibles, compound interest, investments, and resources. As we know, collectibles accumulate value through scarcity, demand, condition, and narrative. However, we don't live from a place of scarcity. Now, the only time there can be something that is scarce is if it's something like, let's say, it's the only thing that has ever been created, a one-time thing. Well, anything else after that is not the original. Think of, for example, you drawing a picture. And then you draw something, again, that same picture. Well, it's now no longer the original that has been duplicated. And so it's not as scarce because you have the same drawing, but now you have two of them. Well, the same thing is going to apply in that capacity. But let's say, for example, gold and silver, because most people like gold and silver. So I'm just using that as an example. Actually, let's use my favorite, gold and rubies. Okay, it's not a limited market. Okay, just because let's say that every single ounce is extracted from Earth of gold and rubies does not mean that it won't ever come back. Just because someone has those things does not mean it can't be sold or given away to someone else. Unfortunately, there's times people will also steal and take. So that's why we also protect those things so that those things don't happen. However, being that collectibles people enjoy can also be, for example, cards. You know, cards are a very real thing that people enjoy collecting. Cards is more of a new thing in history, but for Americans, the U.S., it really started with baseball cards. I mean, there were some cards before that for sure, but it didn't really take precedence until, baseball cards. And after baseball cards, you had more. You had basketball, soccer. Well, then you had trading card games because people would start to use it like a trading game. And people would just start to play games with those cards. And so you also had, for example, anime. And with anime came about, for example, things like Pokemon, or you have Yu-Gi-Oh! And you also have Magic the Gathering. All right, so you have several different areas. And on the basis of cards, it has grading scales today, just like precious metals does, has a grading scale of the rarity of that card. But just because you have that one card does not mean that it's the only collectible. You know, small, consistent inputs grow exponentially over time. So, you could keep collecting, collecting, and collecting, and collecting. Like, for example, for me, books. That's the one thing that I have been collecting that I have not gotten rid of. I have probably gotten rid of some books, but it's very far and few between I've gotten rid of books because I look for specific books that help me or are historical and need to be preserved. And this can also apply where we have, for investments, capital allocation toward productive assets. Books are a productive asset on a long-term basis. I'm not saying all books, but they do have that productive capacity. Unlike, for example, let's say, plastic boxes. Who's going to be collecting plastic boxes and think that they're going to have extreme value? Well, very few people are going to believe such things. And be as it may, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Great. But it doesn't mean that plastic is going to have exponential value long term. All right. The only reason there's people that value plastic today is because one, you have oil industry putting oil in plastics. Two, you have a lot of people, not worldwide, but more so the U.S., using plastics for their food to carry or their drinks to be carried. That's great and everything, but same time, it's plastic. What do you think, for example, like, stamps? Not all stamps are equal to another. Some are actually more valuable than others. So it really just depends on, capital allocation toward productive assets. Is a collectible being a productive asset? And collectibles, mind you, are usually long term. But we also talked about how there's sustainable accumulation avoids depletion. You know, gotta sustain and maintain what you have. Now, for those of you on YouTube, what we didn't discuss, now we did discuss in private, or not private, well, yes, we did discuss in private, but for Kingdom Economics for the private class, we went over biological, elemental, emotional, and mental. Yeah, no, I'm not getting sick. It's just because I shaved my nose hairs, making my nose a little itchy. But when it comes to biological, elemental, emotional, and mental, I added in also material as well, just very briefly. But when we talked about the biological, it's to increase the body's usable energy, durability, and readiness for action. Accumulation biologically isn't excess, it's preparedness and stability of life force in the physical vessel. Because we accumulate things for our body. For example, we accumulate food to be consumed, so that way we can grow the body. Well, we also accumulate children because the body needs to be prepared and stable to provide more life. This also comes with elemental because the elemental is to establish environmental coherence. So the body and system don't expend unnecessary energy compensating for instability. So you obviously need to take care of your body with the right elements. Like, for example, you think I'm going to be sitting outside for an hour in the snow, like dressed the way I am. I'm wearing jeans and a nice polo. It's not by Polo, the company. It's just a polo shirt. You really think I'm going to be sitting outside in the snow doing these videos? No, obviously not. I'm going to be sitting inside where I'm at, where there's heat. It's comfortable. But it doesn't mean I won't go outside, enjoy the snow. But the environmental aspect, the elements, are absolutely crucial in order to provide the body its stability. So its life is going to keep expanding instead of expending. And that's why the emotional side, well, is to increase internal, is to increase internal coherence. So emotional energy becomes structured and usable rather than chaotic or dissipated. Because when it comes to the emotional side of things, all right, your energy, when it's foundational, when you have the right elements around you, you're going to have more stability with your emotions. Because without it, you're going to have less stability. But having those doesn't always mean that you do have that stability. But having that internal coherence and increasing the capacity for the emotional energy to become structured is so that way the more capacity and responsibility you have, the less chaotic internally you'll be. So you don't dissipate and dissolve and become disillusioned. So that's why the mental, which is not just your brain, but also your gut, is to increase clarity, order, and executive function, allowing intentional direction rather than scattered thinking. Because once you have the body prepared. Once you have the elements helping sustain the body, and once you have grounded in self-control your emotions, then you have capacity to increase clarity, order, and executive functions. So you can have that intentional laser tunnel focus direction instead of scattered thoughts and being confuzzled. This is how you're going to then have material accumulation, because it's not separate in this realm. It reflects the stability of the other domains of you. So when you are in an environment that, for example, is violent, well, it's because of what's happening in the spiritual atmosphere for one. For two, it's also a matter of the food that's around, the diet, which is usually going to be fast food, or food that has GMOs and chemicals. You're also going to have certain sounds and frequencies and vibrations, as well as light, that determine the increase in violence in that area, just as much as a lack of education and improvements of not programs, but rather projects for people to accomplish. So instead of creating a project, people will then live in a project created by someone who creates that project for those living in the project, instead of those that shouldn't be living in the project, that are the ones that need to be designing the project themselves. And this is where we're coming into last week for experience of skills, events, and people. Because now there's that accumulation of those different areas. Well, this is where you accumulate those skills, events, and people on top of that. Because skill is accumulated obedience over time. Biblically, skill is not just merely talent, it's refined through repetition, testing, and submission to the process. The only other time is when you get instant wisdom downloaded into you. That's the only other time. But otherwise, it is that repetition, that testing and submission. Because we don't get programmed, all right? That's what the enemy does. The enemy programs people. And so those skills that accumulate through obedience then structure the mastery of who you are. That's why then it comes to that phrase, know yourself, or know thyself. Because you need to know who you are. And knowing who you are, a part of that is skills. What have you been designed to be able to do? For example, me. I've been designed to recognize patterns. I recognize patterns on a macro scale instead of a micro scale. Now I can see micro within the macro. That's how I've been designed. And I took that and applied it into economics. And that was one area. And I do that consistently. Maybe not every day, but I've mastered it enough to be able to see what is right and what is wrong out of what I'm seeing. And I took that even further, went into trading in the foreign exchange market. So besides trading in the foreign exchange market, I also took it and applied it to providing a market newsletter so people can see what is happening by events that add up to that end objective, that outline, that output. And as well, during that, I also was designed to just have structure, build structure. So from that, I learned estate planning and management. And from the estate planning and management, it didn't first and foremost was that. It was in, okay, I had a lot of interest in asset protection. And from that asset protection, I learned more about taxation, as well as specifically trusts. And so I learned those things and specialized going into those areas. Doesn't mean that I know everything, but I mastered enough to be able to execute it effectively. And then whenever there is a mistake, I correct it. Because even those that are still a master at their craft or their skill set, they're still going to make mistakes. But they know enough to be able to make the correct decisions to be successful enough that when there does become a mistake, they know, okay, hey, this is something new that has come into my life that I never came across before, that now I know how to apply this situation. And that's why it comes into events, because events aren't interruptions. They are deposits. They deposit into as revelation, as experience. And accumulating more events, accumulating that experience is going to accumulate that wisdom there. Because you can then apply those skills into these events. And when doing so is when we accumulate people, because people are divine multipliers. Because once you're able to do that thing, people will multiply what you've been doing. However, any untaught lessons will stagnate. So that's why shared wisdom will multiply those outcomes. Well, that is what we are looking for. Yes. And we are going to end off this review with scripture. And then I'm going to share with you where we're headed for the next month. So right now, in the name of Yeshua, I declare the blood of Yeshua over these scriptures. From the previous video, we spoke about Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. I'm going to cover again. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the King, your Elohim. In it you shall do no work, you nor your son, daughter, male servant, female servant, cattle, nor stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the King made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the King blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Then we have Proverbs chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. My son, if you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you'll understand the fear of the King and find the knowledge of Yahweh. For the King gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. we're going to go ahead and flip all the way to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8. So affectionately, longing for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, of Yahweh, of Yeshua, but also our own lives, because you had become dear to us. And last, but certainly not least, is in the book of James. That is in chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And I seal these scriptures in the blood of Yeshua, and in every realm, age, timeline, dimension, frequency, vibration, sound, energy, planet, cosmos, constellation, universe, past, present, future, to infinity, all infinities of infinities and beyond, all eternities of eternities and beyond, all timeless that exist, once existed, and could or could not exist, on all sides of creation, everything in between, in all multiverses, from the beginning across eternity, in Shemaim, in the heavens, on hot rets and under hot rets, Elef Tav. Now, usually, I will have some wisdom from God for the review videos. This time, I do not. That's okay. It doesn't mean I have to have that every single video. But what I will have is his wisdom when it's something that he wants to provide. I can also ask him to. Did I forget? Sure, I forgot. But he also didn't remind me to place it in this video, and that's okay. There's no problem with that. It doesn't mean that you won't always have wisdom. Okay, so we are going to take a look at what's coming into the next month. So for us, we are going into March, because we just finished February. So for ooh, okay, this one's gonna be interesting. I was wondering when this one would be. Okay, so everyone, the next month we're going to be talking about trust creation. And now, what I'm going to let you know, there is 2 ways to go about creating trusts. You can either do it with the institutional template, and the only time I really recommend something like that is when you're creating full asset protection out of South Dakota. That's when I only recommend implementing that kind of trust. It's having full trust protection within statutory U.S. corporate state ran jurisdiction for something like that. Otherwise, I'm going to give you the rundown of the basics for trust creation. That way you have a guide to follow off of, something that you can take with you. And I will do my best to share what a trust looks like, but again, because it'll have some private information, I will do my best to provide a template in per se. But I will talk about, for example, for the next video, the articles, the name, the parties, and the purpose of a trust. Then the week after that, which is going to be for those in the private group, Kingdom Economics, we're going to talk about establishing the documents. The week after that will be executing out of trust. And then the final week will be review. So don't miss it. We're going to be there next week, talking about trust creation. So until then, I will catch you all out then.